Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It is entitled The Power of Process, the Role of the System Architect. We're very pleased to be joined today by our presenter, Eric Ethington. He's the president of LeanShift Consulting. I'm Mark Graben from KaiNexus. We're very happy to be bringing this to you today for our customers and our broader community. So welcome, and please do continue to put in the chat where you're joining us from. Thank you to our presenter, Eric Ethington. He has what he describes as, and I think this is great, a pragmatic approach for Lean. He has over 35 years of work experience at Delphi, Textron, and his own company, LeanShift. So Eric has been fortunate to learn about the science and the methods of improvement from some of the best teachers available while working with highly capable teams in industries including automotive, aerospace and defense, healthcare, medical devices, energy, and logistics. So Eric has a Bachelor of Science degree in industrial engineering from Kettering University and an MBA in operations from the University of Michigan Flint campus. Eric earned a Six Sigma design black belt while working at Textron. He serves on the board of directors at Goodwill Industries of Mid-Michigan, as well as the Alumni Advisory Board for the Industrial and Manufacturing Engineering Department at Kettering University. I know Eric because he is a faculty member. He's been affiliated with the Lean Enterprise Institute for a long time. And he most recently co-authored a new book with Matt Zayko titled The Power of Process, A Story of Innovative Lean Process Development. So we're going to learn a little bit, take a deep dive into part of what's shared in the book, and I certainly encourage everyone to go check that out. So with that, Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for that really kind introduction there, Mark. And thank to everybody for joining us here today. I know this is tough to find an hour. It's also tough to just sign up voluntarily to spend another hour on a Zoom call. So I get all that. So anyway, really appreciate you being here. And what I want to do is just start out with a little bit about what we're going to cover. And there are 3 learning objectives that were advertised, a little bit of familiarity with a model that we introduce. I often refer to it as a series of lenses, the 6COM model we introduce in the book. Then get into defining the role of the system architect and the supporting skills, and then share practical lessons learned for someone getting started. And so that's where we're going to be going as far as learning objectives. Where I want to really start is a little bit about why another book, why this book. And we really like to kind of refer to, and when I say we, it isn't me and my little puppy back there in the picture or anything like that. It's me and Matt, the two of us. And one of the things that we're really attempting to do in this book is at least generate some thinking around breaking what we might call the rework cycle. And the reality is we've personally experienced frustrations. We've seen this with other organizations that we've spent time with, but it's this frustration when you're doing some really great stuff and a lot of smart people, well-intentioned and everything, doing some great improvements in the lean space. And in comes the new process, the new way of doing things gets launched. And it pulls all the resources off the great stuff we're doing to actually go fix the new process. Okay. And that's what really kind of was our wake-up call. We've personally had this happen, and we've seen it happen in other places. And it almost can start an engineering death spiral of you do not, now that the resources are over trying to fix the old isn't progressing anymore. And then you get the new up to speed. Now the next process comes in, and it just kind of keeps repeating. And so what we really wanted to do is in this book is to at least get some thinking and discussion going around the idea of doing this better up front. Never perfect, but doing it better. There's actually an article that Jim Womack published way back in 2008. And in it, he talked about the idea of what's called Tozen versus Kaizen, where Tozen is essentially Kaizen that should not have been necessary, that could have been avoided had we done some things differently up front. And so that's where it comes down to where we say we're trying to break this rework loop. It doesn't mean we're going to launch perfect processes, but what it does mean is there's a lot of learning. In fact, a lot of what we do in Lean is hinged on learning. So why doesn't that learning that we're learning day in and day out make its way upstream into the upcoming processes? So we're really trying to break this development rework cycle, this endless loop of consuming resources, whether it's time, people, money, or whatever. So with that as a little bit of background, as we worked on this book, and this took several years of taking different runs at this, we came up with a model. We called it a 6-con model. Again, I mentioned it's a series of lenses. It's really trying to drive you to learn maybe the right things at the right time. And it starts out with what we call context. And that's where you're really looking at what does good look like. This is where value is understood. This is where the needs of all the different stakeholders are understood and what that value might look like to them. There's obviously the customer, but you can actually drive yourself out of business meeting everything the customer asks you to do. There's also investors, there's employees, there's shareholders, on and on. And so it's like you're really trying to look at the value equation from all of those lenses. Obviously, the customer is king, but what's that intersection? What's that sweet spot? And what does good performance look like in terms of those? And then the idea of concepts is, okay, now that we've identified that sweet spot, let's zoom in on it. And let's start coming up with multiple ideas to fulfill that value equation. And in this case, it's multiple process concepts. I always like to warn people that, we live in an infinite universe. And if all you have is one idea, you probably haven't stretched yourself. There's a lot of options out there. And so that's what we're really trying to get people to think about in concepts is what are a lot of the different ideas that we could look at? What are some ways of looking at them? What is better about some than others? And then that'll lead us into the next area, which is converge, which is where we take all of those different ideas and we start running some experiments, some tests. We learn some additional things. There might be more clarity on the requirements of the program, but all along here, we're starting to converge those ideas from the many to fewer to the one loose idea that we're really going to go forward with. That's when we get into the next phase, which is configure. And that's where we tighten up the looseness of that idea. And, for simplicity, we call it configure. There's also embedded in that the idea of connect, which could have been a 7th con, but we just decided, now we're getting a little carried away. But it's not just how are you physically configuring things, but how are you connecting this? Essentially, what we're trying to do is develop a value stream here. It isn't that we're going to just put in some physical tools, some workplaces, some workstations and say we're done. How does this whole thing connect together? And then, so within configure, we're driving down into that detail, the actual detail process design. The next element is confirm. And that's where as this thing is being installed, whether it's a new clinic going in, whether it's new processes within a transactional environment, whether it's a new line, as this thing is starting to come together and the components are coming together, what can we be doing to test that to see if it's meeting the original metrics we discovered way up in context? What does great look like? Well, we're going to have, certain margins, certain quality levels, certain delivery capabilities, and so on. How are we doing? And we're supposed to keep an eye on that all the way through this. But at this point, we're starting to get some physical stuff that we can test and run real experiments on the actual configuration. And so this is where we run those in some, I'll say, predetermined methods and come and do some reflection. It's essentially the PDCA cycle on the entire process development cycle. And then the final one is actually continuously improve. I started off saying you're not going to launch something perfect. Okay. And if it was perfect, we're not smart enough to know that it truly is perfect anyway. The other thing is unless you're putting energy into improving something, the things of the world are changing and making it degrade anyway as a process. And so there's always going to be that need to continuously improve. But now we're actually driving continuous improvement starting at a higher level than if we were to do what maybe has been done in the past and we reproduce what has already been Kaizened and we just take the prints from 3 years ago or the design from 3 years ago and go plug it in. So why do I give you all that? This isn't for advertising by any means. It's not to overuse the word, but it's context for this system architect, what is on their plate. And so that's why I wanted to start with this, to give you some idea of when I talk about a system architect, this is part of what they're going to be managing all along. So essentially, the system architect, as we flow from idea to delivery to get certain outputs, the system architect is the person helping to orchestrate all of this. And as they orchestrate this, they essentially have what I would say two big problems to keep their eye on, okay? One is the development of the physical value stream. Again, it might be the clinic. It might be a new type of treatment process that's being designed, but it's the actual development of that physical value stream. But interdependent and overlapping a bit is also managing and spreading the new way of working, because this shouldn't be a one-time thing. This needs to also occur over and over again. So how do you systematize it? And also the word managing in the front of this phrase is really starting to, imply that people developing the physical value streams are going to run into issues and roadblocks and stuff. And there's going to need to be management support there, leadership support. And so the system architect is actually really responsible for getting these two problems or getting the organization to address these two problems. It might be a bit of a stretch, but you could almost think of these as two A3s, and the system architect owns both A3s. They're going to be the writer, the author. They don't have to know it all, but they are responsible for getting the organization to understand these issues and act upon them. So architect, I want to spend just a second on the word architect, because it's one of those big, I don't know the phrase, $10 word or $100 words. Like, why did I just say change agent? That's in one of my early careers, we called folks maybe like this a change agent. But the idea of an architect was first introduced to me, a guy named Dave Lagozo. He was with LEI at the time. In 2009, he was doing a senior leader series. And he kind of threw out this idea of the architect as a word to describe this. And it really resonated with me, not just because of the definition, but if you think about an architect, they need to know enough about buildings and building construction and stuff to help guide and set a vision. But they aren't swinging the hammers. They don't know maybe the exact latest in construction techniques, but they know enough to be able to guide the whole thing to come together. And also to be able to set that overarching vision. And so the term really stuck. Back in 2009, it stuck. And so Matt and I proposed the term in the book that we have this idea of this system architect, and they, again, really are responsible for, maybe we'll call it these two different problems, these two different A3s to work. So with that, what I want to do now is just shift gears for a second to the role. And I'll describe this at a high level. I want to make sure we leave time for questions. I always think it's, me trying to guess what you really want to know is kind of being self-important or something. It's like, I'd rather you just ask me what you want to know. But let me give you a little bit more of a framework to ask some questions around. And so one of the things that system architect needs to be, and I mentioned this on the previous page, is almost like that resident visionary to get the organization to set and align around a vision. That could be the vision for the physical value stream that's being designed. And it also can be the vision for the company as far as where are we going with this idea of doing process development in a better way. The second thing is being I would call it the resident historian. And that is, really doing the knowledge capture. There's a lot of great work that's going to be done, but sometimes we don't take time to reflect on the great work and then to capture that knowledge in a way that can be useful the next cycle, which kind of takes us back to slide 1 of this presentation of breaking the rework cycle. If that information, that knowledge isn't being captured, then it's almost like a resource that you're burning and losing. There's a lot of conversation I hear about knowledge capture, knowledge reuse. It's an asset. The trick is how to capture it and how to get it back into the process. And that's part of the system architect's role. Another role that they're going to have, and I'll throw both of these up at the same time, is mentoring and coaching at almost 2 different levels. One would be being able to mentor and coach the team developing the physical value stream. So there does need to be some technical skills there to know enough to be able to help people through the discovery of what could the process elements, how could they come together? What could this value stream configuration look like? What could the detailed workplaces look like? And to also coach people through that discovery. Same thing with the leadership team. This system architect needs to be able to coach and mentor the leadership team because quite honestly, a lot of leadership teams are going to want more faster. They might want to, we're seeing some great early results. Let's spread this right now everywhere. And it's like, we might not know enough. So you need to be able to mentor and coach there. You probably will need to spend some time helping them understand what better coaching might look like. Some might want to rush in when a team raises their hand and says we have a problem and exhibit certain behaviors that are going to be counterproductive. And you need to be able to help along with that. So there's this ability to mentor and coach at the micro level, but also at the macro level that the system architect needs. The next one is really to be a program manager of both of these. If you look at them, again, if we use this A3 analogy, somewhere on the right-hand side of that A3, there's going to be some implementation going on. And the system architect needs to have those program management skills to ensure that whether it's developing the physical value stream or managing and spreading the new way of working, we are hitting our timing. We can see early problems coming up so that we can maybe avoid timing misses, or if we do have some sort of milestone that we miss, how do we get back on track? And the reason performance is in there is, again, both of these elements, whether it's the physical value stream or the new way of working, should have some performance characteristics that you're targeting at the end of the day. Maybe I'm just making up stuff here, but maybe the new way of working, you want it to have a certain lead time from when we start the process development to when it's up and running and hitting all the performance metrics. It should be a lead time of 7 months. Okay, so how are we doing on achieving that? So it isn't just a matter of, are you hitting the timing of the development, but are you really actually hitting some sort of performance metrics? Whether it's a lead time metric, a people resource metric, or so on. And then the last thing I have in here on the role is what I call the liaison. And that is, you are going to probably have to be that bridge, especially early on, how these 2 different things interact between the team developing the physical value stream and the leadership that's there to support them. You will probably have to facilitate some of the interactions. And again, some of that's going to happen during the mentoring and coaching, but you do need to be able to play that liaison. You might need to be able to help the team understand that, what the manager said, they might have said X, but they meant Y. There's a lot of that will probably have to go on, but it's that liaison role between the 2. So that's some of the ideas of the role. And again, if you think about it, and if you think about even any experience that you maybe have had in problem solving in A3, a lot of these are roles that you play when you're trying to work a problem solve. You're trying to mentor and coach, you're trying to keep the timing, you need to have technical skills and so on. So there's some analogies there. As far as getting started, some things to think about, and this is 8 items that kind of bubbled to the top. I believe when Mark sends the PDF out, there's a final page in this that might have 18 ideas, and these 8 kind of bubbled to the top, and I kind of need to limit it, right? But one of the things is aligning on that shared reason for change. And that one's pretty, you might be going, yeah, that makes sense. We talk about that a lot in the improvement world. Like, what's the burning platform? What is that why do we need to change? But that is really important because it's a way to bring everybody back to why we need to keep the resources and the focus on this activity. If there isn't a real reason to drive some sort of change in the organization, everybody's going to lose focus. The fire of the day is going to draw them away, and you're not going to make progress. Pick something meaningful and try. So instead of this being a theoretical discussion of what process development can be, of what system architects do, pick an actual project, and it needs to be a meaningful thing, something that needs to have a process developed. Otherwise, again, I'll go back to the same phrase, but the fires of the day will draw everybody in different directions. And so it needs to be something real and tangible. This one, it says, have a bias towards organizational stability. This might be a tough one, okay? But I've seen it undermined a lot of improvement activities over the year. What I am trying to say here, and this might be tough during the, I've been seeing a lot written about the Great Resignation and, and so on. But if your organization keeps reorganizing every year, it's going to really be tough to get anything like this to stick. There have been times in my career when I, as the continuous improvement person, was the highest seniority in my job role person in a plant amongst the leadership team. And that's wrong, and I'd been there 14 months, but there was no one that had been there more than 14 months because they kept reorganizing. It's just almost impossible to get things going. And so people will move in and out of roles, and that's great because you as a system architect or the resident historian, you can bring them up to speed. But also try to keep the organization from reorganizing every so many months because it does make this a very difficult challenge. Make help helpful. So here I'm borrowing from a colleague of mine, Jim Morgan. That's who I first heard this from. He often implores leadership that help needs to feel like help. And so if leadership's version of help is, oh, you're off target, you get to come in and report twice as often to me on status, that's not helpful help, okay? So we need to really think about that is, as you're designing the system, getting it to work, that helpful happens to be in the same band that the liaison role is in, because that's where you're probably going to have to play some of that is when you're being the liaison, also watching for, is the help we're giving actually helpful, or is it just more busy work, or is it actually slowing things down? Number 5 is coach situationally. This may seem obvious, and I'm not trying to poke a bear here or anything, but there's a lot written on how to coach and what better coaching is, and I think it's very good to keep that in mind. But one thing I don't think gets talked about enough is whoever you're trying to coach, what do they actually need? Like, be situational. Sometimes it's just not the right day to give someone another open-ended question. They don't need that today. They want help. They want helpful help. Okay. Sometimes that's very motivating because someone's in the right mental space to say, yeah, I'm glad you asked it or put it to me that way because now I've just learned on my own. But I just want to warn people that you really need to coach situationally. And I would also encourage, one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is to do some reflection with the people you're coaching and saying, so how was that? Did that help you? Do you have some confidence in taking the next steps? What are those next steps you're going to take? So encourage that reflection back to yourself as you're coaching. I just like to remind folks also that you can mentor upward. In this type of role as a system architect, you're going to have to, just because of helping to establish this as a new way of working. There's going to be people up higher in the organization that you're trying to coach. But don't just think that, oh, boy, I wish my boss knew this or my boss behaved this way. Think about creative ways that you can coach your boss, your boss's bosses, and mentor upwards to get all of this to come together. Avoid lexicon traps. That's a fancy way of saying if there's some word that carries some historical baggage in your organization. When I was starting to do lean in Flint, Michigan, we did not use the word lean. We just stayed away from it. It was all about how to make jobs better. Let's make that workplace better. Let's reduce the number of motions it takes you. That was 2 years later, we could talk about lean, but if there's some words out there, just don't use them. It's not a battle worth fighting. I've also had that when it came to A3. Sometimes that might carry some baggage. I don't know why, but that doesn't matter. Just don't use it. Here's a big piece of paper. Let's have a conversation. Okay. That is really what this is trying to get at. Number 7. Number 8's going to seem a little maybe out of left field, but I would really encourage you to engage your HR organization early on in this. And it's for 2 reasons. One is for feedback. HR in a lot of organizations can be part of that, helping you mentor upwards and helping to give the right feedback to the right managers at the right time. I've done that a few different times in my career where you have your HR lead, your HR business partner in the room during some sort of engagement. And then after the engagement's done, we all retire quietly with HR and the leaders back into another room. And the HR person just gives some direct feedback about what they saw about the dynamics within the room. And so they can kind of do that without, getting themselves or anyone in trouble. The other thing, though, we sometimes don't think about is when you do take an organization through some cycles like that, you're going to develop some really good continuous improvement folks. Is there a career path for them? Often organizations don't think about that. The only career path is for them to go directly into some sort of line leadership job or, run the clinic or something like that. And some people really love this type of work and are really good at it. And they're very comfortable in this problem solving and managing through influence space. And, do you want to force them into roles that they don't want? Or are you going to force them to really capitalize on it? They have to go to another organization. And I've seen that happen many times where we didn't think upfront about the path component for folks bubbling up in an organization through some of these experiences. And the only way they can get some additional benefit career-wise out of what they've learned is to jump ship, go somewhere else and take all that knowledge and skill with them. So that's why I threw number 8 in. Again, there were like 18 different ideas I had, but I thought 8 seems a little bit different than the other 7, but it's, I think, actually a really critical thing to think about is HR and how HR can help you make this happen. And that's for all my HR friends out there that I've worked with over the years that have been so great. So that's what I have presentation-wise. Again, I want to thank you for having me in to talk briefly here, and then I'm going to pass it back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Eric. We have time for a long Q&A session. I don't think we've ever had anyone complain that Q&A was too long. So thank you for leaving time and space for that. A couple quick announcements. To be notified of future webinars, go to kinexus.com/webinars. There's a place where you can sign up to be notified via email if you're not already getting notified of upcoming webinars. December is still uncertain. It might be an Ask Us Anything format with Dr. Greg Jacobson, who is CEO of KaiNexus, him and or myself. But if you want to be notified, again, kinexus.com/webinars. If this is your first time attending one of our webinars, we have this library of more than 100 recorded webinars from the past couple of years. Those are all freely accessible. Again, kinexus.com/webinars. Look for the button to click on for the webinars on demand library. Additionally, we have a blog, blog.kinexus.com. There's something on there almost every day. Again, you can subscribe to receive those via email, or we encourage you to go check that out at whenever you like. And then we also have a podcast. The audio from today's webinar, if you'd like to revisit or share it, will be available in the podcast feed later today. You can get to it at kinexus.com/podcast. You can subscribe through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, basically any app. Overcast is the favorite podcast app of Greg Jacobson, and I've been using that, and it's available there as well. So I encourage you to check out all of those resources, and you can see contact info here, Eric's email and his website, LeanShift.com. So I'm going to shrink that a little bit, bring the focus on us as we have a chance to chat and take questions. So encourage people, please do continue submitting those questions via the Q&A function if you can, instead of chat. So one thing I was going to ask you to follow up on, Eric, if you could, you mentioned earlier in terms of setting context of what to do, and being customer focused is talked about so much, of course, by Toyota and within lean methodologies. But you talked about maybe this pitfall of the risk of going bankrupt doing everything customers might want. I was wondering if you could give an example or just sort of elaborate on that a little bit.
So let's just say that there are the auto industry. You mentioned Toyota. The auto industry is probably full of examples of suppliers that do genuinely put the customer first. That the quality levels. In fact, when I left auto years ago, I was somewhat surprised. There were a lot of prerequisites that you have to have in place to compete in the auto industry, even as a supplier that's been beaten down over the years. There's a lot of prerequisites that you have in place that you don't realize other industries aren't considering yet. So that was kind of a big eye opener to me. And I've seen a lot of organizations where, yes, you deliver, you do not disrupt a car plant. You hear the stories of, how much per minute it costs to shut down a line, of helicoptering parts in, so that you don't interrupt the line, so things don't go down, of great quality, or at least shipping great quality, even if you have to put a bunch of extra inspectors at the end of the line because something's not quite right in the process or in the actual design, and so on and so forth. And so at the end of the day, the customer gets exactly what they want when they want. But you spent a lot of money, a lot of resources getting there. Now, there are some customers that would say you didn't give them what they wanted. I would argue that maybe a Toyota would say you didn't give us what we wanted because we want you to be stable too. But there's many out there, many customers that will all come across, they don't care about that. They're just looking at, did you give me what I want when I wanted it? Does it work? So that's why I say that is there's other, really good decisions are always made in tension with other things. And so, you can you do all that, but still make a profit? And can you do all that and still make your employees feel like they're engaged in the work and that they're going to have a job to come to tomorrow and it's a safe environment? That's what we're trying to get at there.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. When you were talking about some of the roles of system architect, and you talked about being a visionary, being a historian, that seems to suggest that the system architect is probably a fairly senior person. Is that fair to say? Or can you talk about something, if you were to choose a systems architect, how much of that is, how important is that?
I don't know if they need to be senior. They do need to have enough, I would say at least enough credibility in the organization that people, I hate to say it, but there is this idea of power of position, that if you're a certain level, people are more likely to listen to you than if you're an entry level. Okay. Likewise, the more senior you are, the more exposure you and opportunity you may have had to work with senior leaders, that they will listen to you too. So I don't think this would be an entry level type thing. But also the historian thing, I would almost say you're the historian going forward. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to be senior from the perspective that you can, remember everything that's happened in the past. But you do need to be the historian from the perspective of, relative to this thing we've picked that we're going to do, you're capturing the history so that for others in the future.
Okay, because it seems like there's a parallel between system architect and value stream manager.
Yeah. You could draw some parallels there. I'd say the one difference, and I guess it depends. This might be a terminology thing, is you could be the value stream manager, but you're also the system architect is also developing and going to own the process of how are all the future value streams going to be developed? Not just the one I'm managing, but all the future ones.
Yeah. So there's a difference between managing, let's say, thinking in healthcare, an emergency patient value stream, somebody who's helping manage flow and make maybe incremental improvements from everything from EMS through inpatient discharge, because nobody has management oversight over all of that. So we put in a role of a value stream manager. But what you're talking about is more of the process for what happens the next time we have an opportunity to build a new clinic.
Yes.
We're just building a copy of what we had before, or what you're describing is a process for, to some extent, reimagining or reinventing.
Yeah, because this is a different way of working, and just like many organizations might have, let's just use general terms, but a development process, just a product development process. There's these particular steps and milestones and gates you go through to develop the product, and somebody owns that overarching process. And so if it's not performing the way it needs to, if there's it's taken too much lead time or whatever, whoever owns that can go back, reflect on it, work with the organization, rewire that process and make it work better. The system architect kind of owns that in the process development space. You could ask the question, well, why not have one own it product through process? And I'm like, that would be great. We didn't write the book from that perspective because we thought there's probably more organizations that are going to start brownfield in the middle of this stuff than they're going to start at the very beginning all the way to the very end.
Yeah. And it sounds like maybe it's just a check of one other example that maybe comes to mind is, a major drugstore chain is focusing on expanding primary health clinics within the footprint of their store. And it seems like then whether they're doing renovations or building new sites, there's the space design question, and then there are the work design issues. A system architect would try to make sure that's integrated.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. In fact, that's part of what we try to get across in some of the detail, is that as you're going through more and more iterations, you start with some of the different concepts, that it's better to let the work define the space than to lock in on the space and then shove the work into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm thinking back to 20 years ago, I was working for a major computer company, and there was plans to do a new factory. And I think, I know we weren't following this methodology, but I think the system architect in a way was the vice president of manufacturing, who could sort of dictate, like, we're going to have no storage for parts other than what's at the line side now. Okay, here, team, go figure that out. He was kind of making high level pronouncements. He had the vision. And then it required really a large team to think about, how do we design workflows that can allow things to flow even with space constraints? Does that seem like a system architect type decision? Or
they would definitely be part of that. One thing we talk about is we call it an operational declaration, but it's essentially an informed declaration. And there's this fine line between stitching together just a bunch of lean slogans and putting together a operational vision. I remember we had in one of the places I worked, somebody tried to put together, here's what the model cell looks like, and all the attributes of the model cell. And it was kind of like a Swiss Army knife it was good. It could do a lot of things, but it actually didn't do any one product well. If you tried to put your product through this model cell, it just wouldn't work that well, right? So the system architect definitely is part of what is that operational declaration. Just like you said, there's going to be only so many parts line side, or there's only going to be so much inventory at certain points, or there's only going to be, we're going to try and, work, this is going to operate on a certain number of shifts. Perhaps a clinic is it's going to run so many hours a day, and we want everybody to go home at quitting time, and now people have to, work another 2 hours because we have this backlog of patients that we didn't actually get to see,
It sounds like following the model that you and Matt talk about in the book, you would have an idea of this organizational operational pronouncement, but then you're going through some cycles of let's make sure that this is going to be workable. Like there's something like, yes, there's something to be said for kind of a moonshot ambition, but there's the reality of we need a factory that's going to be able to run. Like let's not hamper ourselves by sticking too stubbornly to a pronouncement. So as you go through these cycles, this is where you talk about converge and configure, of just kind of iteratively moving along to here's something we think is workable.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, inside of each of those, there's like iterations within inside of each of those. So even if you think of, concepts, there's multiple iterations to come up with multiple concepts, and then a method of comparison between them to be able to make some more objective decisions. So it isn't that someone comes in and blesses one and denounces the rest. And this is the way we're going. It's like, no, there's some objective ways, because you got to keep the whole team that you're relying on engaged too. And some of these are their ideas that are going to be said no to or adopted and so on. But there's iterations within every one of those cycles. I had someone asking a lot of questions one time about which tools do you apply within which sections. Uh-huh. And it's not a bad question to ask. And it's, I'm going to give the consultant answer of it depends, right? Yeah. But the other thing is, it isn't so much what tools are used in which sections, it's how deep do maybe the tools get applied in which sections. Because early on, you can be looking at a whole value stream and use a value stream map, but there's maybe not as much definition on the process boxes. But as you get further in, you're still using the value stream map, but the depth that you're going into is deeper. And so there's some iterations even within tools that happen.
Yeah. So I had jotted something down about that. And there's a question that came in from David. You may have already said what you would want to say about this, but David had said in my experience in process development, there's usually an iterative element to it. Where does that fit into the 6-con approach? So I think you've addressed that. Is there anything else though that you would want to say to that?
No, I'm glad he asked the question, because absolutely, I don't want it to come across that this is a linear thing. It's there's iteration within. Again, that's maybe why we describe them as lenses, because in context you're looking in more general, but you might be going through some iterations within there. I think in the book we go through eight different iterations before we settle on the final. Here's what we're actually going to configure around. So it is heavily iterative because it's very learning based. And it's also, rather than have a general discussion about, is this workplace design better than this? Well, let's mock it up and give it a try.
Right. Yeah. How do we know until we try? And I think one of the keys, whether it's an assembly line or a production cell or a clinic, how do we iterate in a way that is less expensive and less risky than building the real thing and then realizing, oh no, we missed something. Like that's where you said mock-ups and strategies like that are key, right?
Yeah. In fact, that's always part of the kind of the thing is how detailed, how elaborate do you make a mock-up or a prototype? And the reality is that, let me back up here. The reality is that you almost need to walk into it like, well, what are we trying to learn here? What are we trying to compare? What are we trying to discover? What are we trying to expose here? And then make it elaborate enough to do that and no more elaborate, Yeah.
I mean, in your experience, do you see a role for computer-based simulation as a way of testing different concepts or approaches?
There, yes, with parts of it. You caught me hesitating there. There's kind of a middle ground there because we also don't want to do it. My early industrial engineering roots were in computer-based simulation, and you can very quickly come up with something that completely disengages the workforce because it's just way above them. And so that's why there was that little bit of hesitation. Sure. Is there's a way to take people through that. And some of it is actually having them involved in validating the models, so that they go, wow, this does predict what I just did. And then now it has a whole lot more meaning than.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe there's a parallel, there's a time and a place for simulation, perhaps. The parallel might be that, looking at metrics, performance measures, critically important, but that's not a substitute for going out to the workplace to really see what's going on with your own eyes. So you can find a balance.
Yeah. Yep.
There's another question here that came in from Howard. I love the idea of architect instead of the name change agent. I think the risk of the quote unquote change agent is that they frequently don't grab onto your second point of making the process permanent. So the question, any advice on metrics that you've seen used to help us tell if the new process is actually quote unquote sticking? Is that based on metrics or observation or both? Or
I guess two things there. If the new process is the new value, this is I created this confusion, so I apologize, okay? Because I'm using through this whole thing, I've got two parallel process hats on. There's the value stream, and then there's the process of process development. And so let me try and answer one and then answer it in the context of both of those. One of the things that we really do encourage is people to, in the value stream development, what are the key metrics for the stakeholders? And again, I rattled off some earlier as far as, maybe it has a particular profit margin. It has a particular, return on investment or particular profit margin, particular quality level. It can be delivered on time at a certain on-time delivery capability. You can also, I've not seen a lot do this, but you could have environmental impact or something as a target. You could do that up front, make that a target. Then the trick becomes, okay, that's what it looks like when it launches. Okay, so say it's running 90 days, or you've had this clinic going for 90 days, and we come out and measure it. Did it hit all those things? Well, those same measures, you could probably measure the day you start up too, and it would be the same measures. But if it was going to be, say, 8 weeks before you actually open the doors to the clinic, what would those metrics really look like 8 weeks early? And they might not be exactly the same. And so, for instance, maybe delivery capability, you can't measure because you haven't delivered, but there might be some inputs or some factors that affect your ability to deliver. Are those on target? One thing that we look at now, this is manufacturing, but really early on to measure delivery capability is labor linearity and flexibility of the line. Can it produce just as efficiently, and I'm making up numbers now, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, and 100 seconds? Because if it can produce efficiently at all those, well, I have some higher confidence 90 days after start of production, which might be 18 months from now, that it's going to be able to match the demand very closely and help me hit my delivery and my cost targets, And so that's one of the things we encourage is how do you take these late metrics or these running metrics and how do you back them up earlier and earlier and earlier in the time frame? Relative to measurements on the process of process development, that's where I would look at a couple of things. One is just what is the lead time through that? Number two, if there's certain milestones that you establish within there, what is the capability of actually hitting those milestones? How often are they being hit? How often are they not being hit?
Yeah.
And then there also might be some opportunities in that space to just do some measurements of how much of the new projects that are being launched, how much we did so much investment in new processes this year, how much of it actually is going through this and how much of it is still coming through the old way.
Yeah.
There could also be another way of doing some measurement on before and after, as far as how much, when a line launched, how far off was it on its target metrics? And how long did it take it, and how much resource did it take to get it back on target? Because that's one of those things that ideally you want that to go away. That if we said we're going to launch with, 99.7% on-time delivery in model mix and sequence, then we want the day of launch it to be at that,
Yeah. Let's see, we have another question here. Thanks for that, Eric. We have another question here from Faisal, who says, first off, wonderful presentation. Nice to see you mention HR and its role. So the question is, wondering if you could elaborate a bit on finding the organizational sweet spot as an external consultant. So we might want to ask Faisal to maybe put in a bit of a follow-up, finding the sweet spot of how to navigate an organization in general, or finding the sweet spot in, like, would an external consultant ever be the system architect?
I think the system architect actually needs to be an internal person. Like, I would be a terrible system architect. Now, you could pair me with someone that I'm developing to be the system architect. That's another approach. Okay. But I always think the system architect has to be internal, because it's someone that's going to need to be there day to day, day in and day out, nurturing the system, especially early on. You would love it to be a day somewhere in the future where you don't have to have a system architect that's watching over this process and nurturing it along. But let's solve that problem when we get there. I think a lot of times, even just lean as an initiative within an organization, there's usually someone who is shepherding that early on. And it turns out as much as we want lean to be in everybody's daily work, the need for that role usually goes on for a while. And so to that question, the system architect needs to be an internal person.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, is there more like as far as I mean, if I could get a little clarity on what's meant by the sweet spot? And
I haven't seen a follow up from Faisal, but
okay,
I'll look for that if they're still on the line, to maybe help clarify around that. But one thing you made me think of, again, it seems like there's a parallel between this role and a value stream manager. Like, I see an ideal future state where this is now just how the organization thinks and manages itself in terms of value streams, and focuses on flow and has broken down silos. That formal role of value stream manager might go away, but to your point, it might be very helpful and necessary for a while, or any internal process improvement specialist. I mean, Toyota still has an internal group to help maintain and teach standards related to the Toyota production system. And arguably, by definition, TPS is the way they do business, but there's still a role for somebody to, I don't know if they would use the word architect, but somebody to help oversee. And
yeah, you could, in fact, I could, like, and again, I don't want to talk about the book so much. I'd rather talk about the topics that people want to talk about here. Yeah. But the way we wrote the actual book, there was a pair of people that fulfilled the system architect role, because in the particular organization, we wrote it as a story. In this particular organization, there wasn't a clear cut, this needs to be the system architect. But if you were to take a model on like that early on, and this is where people need to get creative about their own situations, that system architect, coming out of the back end of that, now you got a process developed. One of those people could stick around to be the value stream manager, and the other person continue to be the system architect to take it to the next the next place and maybe develop the next value stream manager. There might be a way of pairing a value stream manager into this. If your organization has that kind of structure where you're going to have a value stream manager, maybe they're part of that implementation team and paired with the system architect. So now the system architect's role is still that technical help, but at the end of the day, they move on to the next thing. They still own the overarching process of process development and how to make that better and how to help leadership understand their role. And now they come and they nurture the next value stream manager.
Yeah. Because for me, it seems like one of the key takeaways or a high level summary is, we often focus on making sure we have a repeatable process, appropriately flexible to help get the work done for the customers. Then there's also a process for bringing new process to be, or the new version of that process to be. If we're doing that enough, hopefully it's a repeatable but refined process for that over time.
Yeah, that's kind of a good way to tie all that together is, just like we would try to design a repeatable process to generate value for the customer, what we're trying to do is generate or create a repeatable process to generate value for the customer. It's like one level removed.
Okay. Maybe we have time for a couple other questions here. So Jessica said, again, thank you for a wonderful presentation. She's here in a small nonprofit in Chicago, and the improvement process is still pretty new in human services areas. So she's wondering, do you have any advice on tools or systems you would recommend for tracking and recording some of the history that you talked about in the context of system architects, how to track that history in a meaningful and accessible way?
Yeah, I would welcome a really good solid example in that space. There's the obvious ones where people maybe will set up just an internal site, a SharePoint site or something like that to capture. I'm not saying don't do that, but part of my caution there is if you don't design, here I am going off on process again. If you don't design a process to put data into that and to categorize it in a certain way, and then to also sunset stuff as it gets older, or archive it or something, you fast forward in 2 or 3 years and you've got this unmanageable snowstorm in there that no one goes in there anymore. And so you didn't really achieve what you wanted. Okay. One thing that, and this is going to be a really I know kind of a very general answer. And so I don't know we'll see if want to ask a follow-up question if it's not quite helpful. But one of the most effective ways to capture knowledge is to build it into the work itself. Okay. And we do that, the physical version of that, and that's where it's easier, is when we start to learn about how to maybe better lay out a workplace and we physically create that layout. And now there's this physical example of, don't put that thing in the way because the person has to reach through here, or don't put this here, that you can actually create a physical thing that actually is an embodiment of the lessons learned. Okay. When you get into knowledge work, that gets a little foggier, but are there ways of putting those lessons learned into the work of doing some of this, I'll call it this more knowledge work. Sometimes that might be done through checklists. Sometimes that might be done through, software that gives you cues. Now I'm kind of getting more engineering oriented, but, you can develop CAD systems that say, no, you can't do that kind of dimension or that kind of maneuver in here because that violates the standards, the knowledge that we've captured.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric. We're almost out of time. I will tack on a comment, for KaiNexus customers who are using our software to track their improvement activities, their Kaizens, their A3 and initiatives. If they were to embrace this, process design methodology, I could see them configuring and using KaiNexus to help track that process development model and lessons learned and improvements over time, as one form of repository. So again, our presenter today, I want to thank you, Eric. He has been Eric Ethington. He's the president of LeanShift Consulting. Go check out his website at LeanShift.com. and I hope you go check out the book. Again, the full title of the book is The Power of Process, A Story of Innovative Lean Process Development, co-authored with Matt Zayko. That's available now. So Eric, thank you. Congratulations on the launch of the book, and thanks for taking some time to do the webinar today.
Okay, well, thanks for having me in, and everybody, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. There are some thank yous. Thank you for a great presentation coming in on the chat. So thank you everyone for attending. Thanks again, Eric.